It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to continue talking about PFL. We're going to go over some comments that Don Davis made. We are going to talk about a lawsuit that Gegard Mousasi has filed against Bellator and their new owners, the PFL, of which one Don Davis runs. But first, let's check in with our guy over here and see how he's been.
Oh, great. Spectacular.
You don't sound like you're feeling great and spectacular.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to put a positive spin on things. No, I'm doing good. Just hanging around. I'm still in Minnesota. I got another week here before I head back to sunny Southern California. But I can't really complain. The weather's been pretty perfect out here in the Midwest.
That's awesome. I love that. And we had a really nice day here, too. It didn't get above 76 degrees. And I kept thinking to myself, yeah, John would be jealous of this weather.
Yeah, well, it was 70 here today. It's gonna be like
now you're just trying to make me jealous.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I can't complain. Like I said, I can't complain. I will, but I shouldn't complain.
All right. So before we get into the PFL stuff and the Gegard Mousasi stuff, let's take a quick question or two regarding UFC M1. And where do these questions come from? Me. So I need to know what you make of Dana White saying he is super frustrated with the current UFC rankings and that he wants to, and I quote, introduce a solution.
Well, talk about the gumption of the man. I'm intrigued by the rankings. One, I'm intrigued by the fan reaction. A lot of the people are like, yeah, Dan, you got to fix these rankings. And fighters saying the same thing. Not understanding that, the rankings the UFC created, it's an invention by the UFC, their rankings. They're the ones that give positions to the media members, invite the media, and allow basically a bunch of media sites that I think are defunct at this point, right? They're not real sites anymore.
And a lot of them also were from sites that were minuscule, very, very tiny sites. It was different in the beginning, for sure.
Yeah. It started out, they actually had a lot of the major media members. And I would have refused. I don't think media members should participate for the very fact it's a UFC ranking and they're going to use it for leverage, which they do in negotiations, taking people off the rankings. So when it's interesting too, when people say the UFC rankings don't matter, and there's Dana White saying rankings are very important to our matchmaking. It's like, this kind of counters what a lot of people argue. The rankings are important because that's what the fan base is conditioned on. You're watching this, trying to see, people want to see who are the best, and you're just conditioned to follow, just like the AP sports polls for rankings for college football. Fighters, you might not be your favorite fighter. You might not like, BYU when they're highly ranked over Notre Dame, and Notre Dame might be more popular, but a highly ranked BYU is much more interesting to viewers than a lower ranked Notre Dame is much less interesting than a high ranked Notre Dame. So the rankings have an impact on just people's perception. And so it is important. And his solution now is to complain about the media because he doesn't want the UFC to take the blame, and talk about introducing AI. And I find it intriguing in some ways because the major problem is one is the UFC rankings rank only for these rankings only rank UFC fighters. And so fighters, basically when Dana White says, I don't want to control the rankings, he does control because he controls who's allowed to take part in the rankings, who can be in it. And if the fans all they do is pay attention to UFC rankings, then the fighters who leave and are removed, they lose a lot of their value because they're no longer important fighters because they're no longer ranked by the UFC. So that's my problem. I think the solution would be to go to like an AP style. The consensus rankings have a large media pool that rank it, and it covers all fighters, and the UFC can just use that for the fighters in their promotion if they want, but it covers all fighters. So when fighters leave a promotion, not just UFC, but PFL or whoever, they retain their ranking and can use that in negotiations. Because I may be mistaken, but I do remember back years ago, before there were these promotional rankings, when those consensus, the SB Nation consensus rankings were probably the number one, that there was more interest, more intrigue in seeing someone from like Strikeforce or Bellator and Eddie Alvarez, or Gilbert Melendez, Luke Rockhold, one of those fighters that were towards the top of another promotion, to see them enter the UFC. And I don't see much intrigue, not nearly as much intrigue as there used to be about higher ranked non-UFC fighters ever making their way to the UFC. And I think part of it is because we've walled off the promotions with these rankings so that the casual fan that might, see the rankings at some point has no idea or knowledge about other top ranked fighters.
And I couldn't agree with this more. It's one of the reasons why I always put out every week for my own podcast, my other podcast, The Level Change. I put out the alternative stats, which tells on each card how many ranked fights there are. And by ranked fight, I mean both fighters in the contest have a ranking in the top 15. And then I put out how many ranked fighters there are on a card, how many fighters are coming off losses. But the interest for me is much the same. I would prefer to see more ranked fighters fighting each other than basically the bottom of the barrel, which is what you get from Apex cards. It's why Apex cards are the devil.
Yes, well, there's a reason the old Care Don't Care show is not around anymore.
Exactly.
And part of it, we get now. I appreciate the Apex cards. I appreciate it because they're cards you can skip.
Yep.
You can just look at it. It's in the Apex. Don't have to watch it, or I can look at the main event or whatever, because it's just going to be filled with filling, basically card fillers, guys that are just there. Mm-hmm. To fill up the number of fights, but they're not important or relevant. And if you're a gambler, great, you can bet on their fights, but I didn't mind that, but the reason we had to quit the Care Don't Care show, if anybody remembers, with me, Stephanie, and Eugene, is because we'd get cards, Apex cards, where basically every fight was a not care, and it's hard to get people to tune into a show where 2 out of 3 events that you're going over, there's not a single care on it.
Yeah. And for instance, this last card where Brandon Royval and Tatsuro Taira just fought, that card originally had 13 fights on it. It ended up being shaved down to 12 fights because one fighter missed weight so bad that they canceled the fight. But out of 12 fights, only one was ranked, and we got 2 ranked fighters. Obviously, the 2 fighters at the top that were, our one ranked fight. A single ranked fight out of 13.
And of course, yep. And of course, these are ranked only by the UFC.
Exactly.
It's not a consensus ranking, which again is what I recommend, because in some ways too, it would not be a game changer, but it would offer a little more leverage to fighters, because like if you're the PFL and you have a fighter in the top 10 that the majority of hardcore fans recognize as a top 10 fighter, you can't just let him walk. You gotta pay him more. In the UFC, it's like, he's a highly touted fighter. We can't let him leave because people will recognize that this highly touted fighter is now somewhere else, where if it's a promotional rankings, you're basically, as soon as you're gone, someone else steps in to fill the void, and you're like Stalin, what he would do with his opponents, you're written out of history.
Yeah. All right. And one last question on this real quick. You mentioned earlier that fighters should beware of, Dana trying to fix things. Would you say that is because Dana wants to fix things to where the UFC has more control over the rankings?
Well, we can't just target Dana because every MMA promoter is the same. Boxing promoters would be the same too if they could do it. But yeah, I think, the thing you got to be worried about when Dana has to fix something, one is, obviously they're upset that the rankings aren't turning out the way they want them.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that makes me a little nervous because, okay. And then of course he blames the media that he invited to participate in his own rankings instead of the rest of the media who don't take part. So again, he finds a way to blame it on his opposition, his nemesis, the media again, even though they really have nothing to do with it. And what he's trying to do is claims that there's something wrong with the ranking. So it's like, well, what's wrong with it? It's not ranking fighters the way you think they should be ranked. Well, what's the problem? My guess might be that he wants a way that they can influence rankings more, because the lately they've been on a kick about John Jones being number one pound for pound. Is that because Dana White thinks he's pound for pound? Possibly, but I also think it's strongly possible is they like the idea of advertising John Jones as the greatest fighter of all time going into an event to see if they can push up buys because of the increased interest because of that.
Yep. And let's not forget that last year, before all of this John Jones pound for pound talk ramped up, last year he was pretty pissed off because all of the websites were basically talking about how the Apex cards were very watered down, had a lot of a lack of ranked talent. And remember, he said that he was toying with the idea of doing away with the rankings. He actually said that in an interview. Well, what if we just get rid of the rankings? I'm seriously thinking about that. And this way you guys can't, no, it wasn't doing away with the rankings. I take that back. He said he was toying with the idea of expanding the rankings to the top 20. So basically, so he could shut the media up about the lack of ranked talent on the cards.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't mind if the rankings expanded to 20 or even top 25. But again, it should be universal rankings. It should be not intra, instead of promotional, it should be interpromotional. So that would be my preferred is they expand it to top 25. So top 25 fighters all have a ranking, and promotions all use like an AP style ranking that cover everybody. I mean, they're ripping off right now. That's the other thing. They're ripping off boxing because they have the champion and then the top 15. Well, in boxing, the rating, it's not a ranking, it's a rating. The champion's not rated because he's the champion, and the next 15 are supposed to be the contenders. But there's no such thing as a mandatory. We don't have box offs, which are the top 4 guys competing against each other for a chance to be the mandatory. We don't do anything like that in MMA. It's just a system to promote the fights and the fighters, so fans have a way to follow it without actually being committed to giving guys fights because they won.
Right. All right, so that's going to put a button on our rankings talk. Let's move into our one other topic before we get to PFL and Gegard Mousasi. One Championship announced another round of funding, this time reportedly for $50 million. Is this enough to get them where they want to go, or where they're telling everybody they're going?
Yeah, this is, if you look at it, this puts them over 500 million US. So they've had, and the sad truth is they're going to, if you've gone through about 500 million before this, another 50 million, I do not think will be enough to make them the duopoly they've always claimed they have, to be a $1.4 billion venture. That ship has sailed, I think. And its sad truth is this 50 million, I think, will be enough to get them where they're going to go, which is, it seems like now they're going to just be basically a regional Muay Thai promotion in Thailand, Bangkok. That's where they're pivoting to. They've scaled down their operations. They just let go a bunch of people. They barely do MMA events. They're not doing another event in the United States. They canceled the Atlanta event. Almost all their events take place in Thailand now. So, and again, they only do two MMA fights per event, basically. So they're barely an MMA promotion. So, and again, they're also releasing a lot of the high level, expensive MMA fighters, or their fighters are complaining they're not getting fights. So they've scaled their operations down a lot. This 50 million will probably let them continue for now over the runway. And then, he did claim, Chatri, that they're on just the cusp of profitability. A lot of people laugh at that. I think it's possible because if you cut expenses down to nothing and you become basically just a small little Muay Thai event in Thailand, right? You don't have much expenses. It's a lot easier to keep operations going with whatever you're making from Amazon and a few other things. So it's possible that they actually get to profitability, but I do not know how happy the investors are going to be that put in hundreds and hundreds of millions. I mean, spending 500 million to become a Muay Thai promotion in Thailand does not sound like money well spent. So,
that's funny.
Yeah. Well, sadly, that's it. The other question too is, we don't even know. Don't have the details yet of this 50 million. Is it? We know some of it's from Qatar. How much of it's from Qatar? How much is it from other entities? If it's from like Mission Street that have a relationship with one and with and Evolve MMA, I would be somewhat questioning the type of money they're investing. Perhaps it's convertible notes. If it's a convertible note, it's not true capital. It's a loan that gets converted into equity on certain conditions, but it'll have an interest. So that's not great. So I have a lot of questions about the money, but we did, if you're a listener to the show, when we talked about when they've changed the corporate name and re-domiciled into Singapore, we did say that we are guessing, based on everything that happened, we're pretty sure that there's going to be another round of funding coming between 50 million and 100 million.
Yep.
Let's pat ourselves on the back. We were right again. Let's ignore the parts we've been wrong. We will never bring up when we're wrong again. But when we're right, we will remind you. And this, we were right. And I still don't think it is enough to get to keep the illusion of the duopoly alive. The duopoly has moved to another promotion at this point.
Can I pound on my chest a little bit for us and just say that we were also right with our Francis Ngannou predictions of his money?
Yes, we were. Well, we didn't really predict it. We lifted it from information we got from people. But yes, we were right. We were right. I think it up our stuff will when anybody else gets that information, they'll look at it and go, Jesus, you guys nailed it 100%.
Yeah. All right, so now it's time for some PFL stuff. Don Davis did this interview with Front Office Sports, and he talked about how they could not have put on their Battle of the Giants. And for those out there that are listening, if you don't know what Battle of the Giants is, it is the upcoming card where Francis Ngannou will face Renan Ferreira for PFL's Big Chungus heavyweight title. So anyways, do you think that they could have put on their Battle of the Giants without the Saudis? Because he says that the price tag was more than $20 million, mostly to the fighters. Now, does that sound accurate to you? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!